Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar focused on building adaptive, future-ready AI organizations. I'm Adam Hadley, the CEO and founder at QuantSpark, joined by my colleague Wanda. So over the next hour or so, we'll go through our thinking with regards to preparation to ensure that you're best placed to use AI in practice, and we have a few suggestions along the way. I'll hand over to Wanda to start the presentation. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end, of course, so feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box, and we should be able to get to those in around half an hour. Thanks, Wanda.
Thank you so much, Adam. So lovely to be with you all this afternoon. And I thought I'd start off with maybe just a little bit of an analogy around kind of AI and how we see AI. And really, AI has proven to be innovation at hyperspeed, right? Things are so much faster, they're so much quicker, they appear so much easier to do as we begin to look at the wonderful advancements happening all around us with regards to AI. Sometimes it's helpful to look back before we look forward in terms of thinking about disruption, adoption, and how we move between kind of moving from a current state to a future state. And of course, everybody knows this kind of juxtaposition, I'm quite sure, where we talk about two really big giants and how they did or didn't adapt, or how they did and didn't innovate. So of course, we know the story of IBM and Skunk Works. Skunk Works were broken off as a different area within IBM that operated independently and was able to innovate really quickly to bring the first IBM PC within record time of kind of 12 to 18 months to life. Would never have happened within the big constraints of the gigantic organization that was IBM at the time. So real success story there in terms of how they responded to the demands, the market, and the pace at which the market was moving. Contrary to that, Kodak, the story of the digital camera, actually invented by them, but swept it aside, dismissed it as a fad, dismissed it as hype. Oh, that thing's never going to take off, and found themselves well and truly, suffering the consequences of just not being able to adapt. And with AI, we're all required to adapt now at faster and faster paces in order to really innovate and stay ahead of the curve. So let's have a look at kind of the state of successful and kind of sustainable AI adoption and AI ROI at the moment. And here's two really interesting stats. The first one is one that's very well known, biggest kind of study done on digital transformations across the globe. And 70% of digital transformations fail, not due to tech, but due to human aspects, right? Human resistance, a lack of adoption, etc., etc. And then the other interesting study done by BCG, who reported that only 1 in 10 AI initiatives actually achieve sustainable ROI. So they actually, for all the money and time invested, don't provide, 9 out of 10 don't provide any sustainable ROI for clients. Arguably a huge waste on both accounts. So why is this, do we think? First of all, kind of innovation needs space, right? So 84% of executives say innovation is critical. Only 6% are satisfied with how their companies are actually innovating. So innovation really requires space. And this is true for, and a really good example is, of course, IBM. They had to break away a separate space in order to really innovate effectively and well. And we'll talk to you a little bit later on about how we can help you to do that, how we can help you to really create the space for innovation within your organization. Within these very rigid systems, if we think about it from a systems lens, within these very rigid systems, those rigid systems are not designed for rapid iteration, for high innovation. They're designed for stability, right? And so the two kind of sit, opposite one another if you think about innovation and the kind of very rigid systems that companies are really built around. The other side of that is that very often we want to innovate, we spend so much time kind of in innovation paralysis mode, right? Where we're thinking about the best solution and we're thinking about how we're going to do it. And we're thinking about when really we should be actually testing as we go. So really implementing, testing, seeing what's working and changing as we go. And this is very much a complex adaptive systems approach to change, right? Where you change iteratively over time. You have a direction in mind, but that end goal might shift depending on the unknown unknowns that come up during that kind of iterative process. The second big reason we think is because there's this idea of people being kind of really afraid of being replaced, devalued, or left behind. And so this kind of identity threat is really, really real. In 2023, Microsoft survey said that 49% of employees worried that our AI would kind of make them obsolete. Now, if people are kind of operating from that point of view, where they feel their identity is threatened and they feel their value is threatened, you can imagine that the natural inclination is definitely going to be protection and resistance. And so it's very natural to assume that there will be people who just say, I'm not going near that thing. I know it's the new way we're doing things, but I don't know it. And I'm just not going to go, I'm just not going to use it. I'm just not going to use it well. And so this is where we see a huge diminishment in kind of adoption rates because of this resistance stemming from identity threat. And of course, our naturally negatively biased brains, which are designed to protect us, right? This is new. I don't know it. I'm going to stay away from it. The third reason is really that AI works best when, upskilling is part of AI projects. So there's kind of a 20% higher adoption rate and faster paybacks, faster ROI when AI upskilling around that specific tool, but also generally is invited into that process of project delivery. And very often it isn't. The upskilling part, or there's training on this is how you use the tool, but there isn't really that upskilling part to say, well, where's your mindset at the moment? How would you usually do this thing? How could it really help you to be more productive? What are you going to get to when you're more productive using this thing? And so I think that the third element is really this skills development area. With people experiencing quite a lot of resistance there around using specific tools. So really kind of impacts in the workplace is, AI has the capability to really enrich work, to free you up to do the things that are really of interest and where you feel you're going to add the most value. And leadership really needs to be really, really clear about framing AI around the productivity kind of aspect and the enhancement aspect to roles and to your work life. But there's a lot of kind of common barriers. Being the villain, again, is that kind of identity threat that we see. The costs, because a lot of projects are planned with huge projects, scopes that are very, very heavy and that are very, very long term. And often by the time that they're delivered, the next thing is already, the market has moved past you, the next innovation has already moved past you. And very often there's a lack of understanding. So starting with an innovative pilot to prove the ROI has really proven for us to be the best possible way of inviting clients into this AI journey and inviting their teams along as well. And then investing in the training and the culture to really build confidence with AI and framing it in the right way to eliminate the negative bias and alleviate these kind of identity threats that we may find. The fourth big reason is obviously, and where it plays a crucial role, is this idea that leaders will signal what is safe to do. And so when leaders are saying, we need to use AI, but we've got no clear plan around how we use it day to day, or what we're leveraging it, or how we're leveraging it. There's no safe spaces for people to actually innovate around it, you know, and that can have a massive, massive impact, where managers are 2 times more likely than employees to use AI on a daily basis, but really only 29% of them actually model responsible usage and are actually sharing that knowledge in kind of responsible ways. So what's our AI transformation approach? So we think about mindset, strategy, and then action in 3 kind of in a process around where to start and how do we develop from here. And if we think about the transformation Gen AI pyramid here, you can see that there's many, many ways of kind of unlocking value, right? Lots and lots of ways that AI can be used to really unlock tangible value almost immediately, or starting somewhere and unlocking something almost immediately. The one thing that it simply cannot do is this bottom layer, which is really kind of foundational, right? It's really foundational that your people and your culture sit and support all of this, because without this base layer here, arguably all these other aspects will be quite tentative. You know, it's like building something on sand, or building something, you know, on a solid kind of surface. You want to have that surface really solid and ironed out in order to support all of the initiatives and all of the gains above. So let's rethink AI together then. How can we help? We can look at this AI transformation management framework and way of working that we've set up that really leads clients through how transformation impacts people from an organizational psychology perspective and from a behavioral science perspective. And then we can think about this QS Labs approach, where we are able to support your own innovation quite independently in order to ensure that you are really staying ahead and able to innovate at pace. So it's time now, after that very rapid run through, for us to give you a little gift and ask you to reflect, act, and then invite you to take a first step with us. So can we think about what's your adoption to AI approach been to date? And maybe you want to share some thoughts you know, with your team and say, I think our approach has been this in the past. And very often when we get into these projects or mindsets or initiatives, we don't stop enough to reflect, to think, what was our approach at that time and how do we need to change it? And then how can you radically improve AI adoption in RI? The invitation from us is to take our free AI change readiness assessment. It'll be shared with you after this webinar. And that's going to give you a good place to kind of think about AI transformation and what needs to be in place. It's very simply 21 questions. It provides some clarity around areas where you may need to focus. It'll give you a spider graph. It'll also give you some recommendations in each of those areas as a starting point to think about how to really use this AI transformation framework in a really helpful way. So we use behavioral science quite a lot in our transformation journeys, our AI transformation journeys, and these are some of the outcomes that we've actually seen. These are some of the practical levers that we actually can draw on, and certainly helpful to, if anyone's interested, certainly happy to take you through what AI transformation ROI would look like for your organization. I'm going to hand over in a moment now to Adam, who's going to talk you through a little bit more about QS Labs and how that can help your AI adoption and transformation initiatives by breaking out these kind of innovation labs for you, where you're able to innovate at pace. This is just some of 20% more alignment with AI roles, you know, a 2 times idea to action rate, reduced program abandonment, reduced change fatigue are some of the results that we see using kind of this behavioral science lens. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Adam, who's going to take you through a little bit about QuantSpark, how we work, and our QS labs.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Before I go through this slide, perhaps a few reflections on some of the thoughts that Wanda shared so far. At QuantSpark, we've been working with businesses for more than a decade to help them understand how to use data, analytics, machine learning, and all manner of AI to be more profitable, to be more efficient. And I think the main lesson we've learned over the years is that actually the strategic outcomes that we work with our clients to achieve often have very little to do with the data. And as Wanda's highlighted, the organizational psychology, the ways of working, the processes are much more important to understand. These days, actually, the data, the analytics, the AI is often the easier bit. Actually, really understanding what to focus on and how to ensure that this new technology, the new use of AI is effective, that's actually the most important thing. And these sort of soft skills and these soft elements of our engagements are almost always the most important. A point that Wanda made earlier as well was about failure. And of course, there's been quite a lot in the news recently about failed AI initiatives. And it's really interesting. I think where innovation is concerned, failure is kind of mandatory. The trick is ensuring that the failure is manageable and that we can learn from that failure. And agile project management styles are designed with this in mind. And at QuantSpark, the way we do the vast majority of our work is we focus on this growth flywheel. So we'll start with an initial opportunity or idea, typically after having worked with the client for many months to really understand where they should start and what they should do next. And then we'll iterate very quickly. We'll try to identify a meaningful process that warrants automation or augmentation. I think this is a key point as well. Focusing on the right part of the business is often the most important thing that you need to do to begin with. And then using a number of techniques that have nothing to do with data at all. So design thinking, behavioral science, and other approaches to ensure that whatever is being built is useful, both now and in the future. So I'm sure many will be familiar with the product development lifecycle, starting with a pilot or prototype, moving to a proof of value or proof of concept, and then gradually iterating and improving. So in our experience, what's important is to ensure that there's a deep and meaningful understanding of what processes in your organization you're looking to improve through data, analytics, and AI. It has to be about processes. And QuantSpark Labs is really the way that we go about this. So innovation is the core of what we do. A lot of what we do fails. Certainly the majority of it works. But what is essential is understanding, I think, how to have short, sharp sprints of work, ideally providing value very early on. And to Wanda's point, when there's resistance, when there's uncertainty, when there's fear, the best thing you can do is to design a program of activity that provides tangible results very early on. And we've worked with businesses for some time, often private equity backed businesses, but not exclusively. And providing value very quickly is essential to build trust and confidence in the organization. So speed to value is not just about impatience. Actually, I think this is a really important part of getting buy-in and making sure that the development is modular as well. Focusing on things that matter to the organization, not just to the CEO, but actually to your frontline colleagues, those people who are tasked with dealing with a really sort of tedious or complex process. So the design of the roadmap is really important. I know a question has been asked about this. I'm sure we'll come back to it. And it may be that you've got to start on something perhaps a bit unexpected to win trust and confidence with the team. The funny thing is, and we were joking about this earlier, almost always the most important thing any organization can do is to ensure that its fundamental data, the data foundations, the data architecture is as good as it possibly can be. But I'm yet to find a client in the public or private sector who is prepared to invest the money required to rebuild the data foundations. You're never going to get that. You're never going to get your CFO signing that off. However, if you can focus on a number of sprints, helping to build tools quickly, where you're focusing on the pain points of your users or employees, that can be really very effective. And this methodology, I mean, agile development is certainly not new, but ensuring that this methodology is used for the slightly higher risk work is really an essential part of this. Another point, actually, on this in particular, is that we actually use a lot of generative AI, and we're mainly talking about generative AI in this presentation, but we use a lot of generative AI to build rapid prototypes. So gone are the days when you need a very large team and a large amount of time to build a proof of concept or a pilot. Actually, you can really do that in a matter of weeks. We won't go through many examples here, but often we'll aim to build a tool within 4 weeks, which is quite ambitious often. And part of the value of that is kind of making people realize, this is actually possible. It needn't take years to do something, provided there is focus on problems that matter and pain points that are relevant to the organization. So moving on to the next slide then. Um, I think it's essential to stress that when we're talking about AI, when we're talking about analytics, we're also talking about software. AI doesn't really mean anything other than it being code, it being some sort of application that's connected to your other systems in the organization, in your business. Now, I think the traditional approach to this sort of transformation work, and actually often where we pick up work, is from failed attempts for multi-year transformation programs, is that the traditional approach often is kind of very long term. And it's almost impossible to scope out work that far ahead. It's almost impossible to understand the intricacies of the processes that you're trying to improve. And also, given that generative AI is moving so quickly, it's pretty much impossible to know what capabilities will be around in, well, a few months or a few weeks in some cases. So the traditional approach, for a whole range of reasons, psychological, organizational, behavioral, and also technological, well, it no longer cuts it. And at QuantSpark, we're really advocating, this can be done internally, of course, for a different way of going about things. Taking the best parts of agile product development, which software engineers have been using for a very long time, and applying that to this sort of innovation work, and really forcing focus on a 3 to 4 week sprint and a tangible product, a tangible app that can be created in that time. I would say, of course, that failure can also happen even if the proof of concept works and everyone likes it. And that can be the case when there hasn't been enough thinking being put into productionization. And that's to say how the tool can be used and implemented at scale. And that's also an essential part of this. But often you don't want to think about that too early in the deployment because it could stop progress. So moving on to the next slide then, I just want to share some insight into how we go about things. So we often find targeted proof of concepts are a bit like Trojan horses. If there's a way of finding a really high value problem that people are quite annoyed about, right? It's causing a lot of aggravation. It's very time consuming. It's very boring, but also is an important process. Actually, by building targeted proof of concepts for those, and then gradually clustering them, and then scaling them when you've built trust and confidence, often is the right way of going about things. So it's a bit like boiling a lobster in that sense. We advocate for being really focused to begin with in these targeted proof of concepts and gradually building trust and confidence. In my experience, this is not really about the technology. This is about the psychology of adoption. And it may well be that you pick a targeted proof of concept that doesn't, it's very low ROI, but it may win the hearts and minds of a particular team and may buy you some political capital to start building analytics and AI solutions at scale in your organization. So I would say that this is as much an art as a science. It's perhaps a peculiar thing to say coming from QuantSpark, because obviously we focus on building things. But I think the psychology element of this and thinking through transformation is the most important thing, as well as, of course, having enough time to think through what you should really be focusing on, and crucially, what processes you want to be improving in your organization. So with that, almost exactly on time, we have a few questions, and let's see if we can answer them. So if I go through some of these, Wanda, and maybe direct some to me or to you as appropriate,
Perfect.
does that work? So the first question, how do you define human-centered AI in practice, and what are the key principles that differentiate this from other AI development approaches? Maybe I'll start on this and wonder if you have thoughts as
Sure.
well. So human-centered AI. Well, um, quite a lot of our work at QuantSpark is focused on content moderation on the internet at scale. And you might imagine, there's a huge amount of concern about content on the internet and how it can be, abusive or harmful content can be removed. And suddenly, this idea of human-centered AI in that context is often thinking about bias. It's thinking about actually how can we build systems that support desirable outcomes for the people who are part of a particular company or a particular platform. I think there's something kind of more profound where product development is concerned, which is that regardless of it being AI or not, when you're building data product, it has to be meaningful for whoever needs to use it. Um, that means using design thinking principles right from the outset and ensuring that you're getting buy-in. You're really empathizing with people in your team and understanding their perspective about how they're using technology. Because a lot of the time, what this is about really is about the gaps between tools, the manual processes, between software between software that's already been used. So really thinking about why your people are doing particular things, what the processes are, what the workflow is. That's actually absolutely essential because successful tool development in this space, um, I think, has very little to do with the AI, and it has everything to do with understanding the underlying processes and the people who power those processes as well. So I would always frame this as being human-centered is absolutely essential, and if that hasn't happened, then you're almost certainly going to have a failed project, but in the wrong way. I would say, though, this also applies to lots of initiatives that are quite technical. Actually, if you're building a forecasting model for your supply chain team, you need to really listen and learn and understand the intricacies of processes before you start building tools to automate or to improve those, because often things can go wrong very quickly. Having said that, in many cases, many business critical processes haven't been documented. So, in fact, most of the work we do is preparation for building tools, and that preparation is trying to uncover what those processes um, might be, were they recorded and documented. So the reality actually, it's a bit like one of those memes, what you do, what your friends think you do, what your family think you do. You know, a lot of what we do is mapping business processes or creating them as is and to be, and then building tools alongside people to ensure that we're solving the right problems and in the right way. Wanda, what's your perspective on human-centered AI?
Yeah, I agree, Adam. The one thing I would add to what you've said is this idea of when we're mapping out the processes, really thinking about the people and their roles that are going to be part of or are part of that process, considering what might be trigger points for them, either emotional or psychological trigger points for them, and trying to work through how we frame things to be highly iterative with them so that that risk is lower for them. And it's a little bit like framing it as you would for safety. In any case, no matter what you're doing, you want to be framing things to say, we're going to try this thing. We're expecting it to be like this. It may not be like that. We'd like for you to try it with us. And that kind of approach is really, really helpful for kind of eliminating any of those kind of trigger points for people and helping them to be, helping them to want to try with you and innovate with you.
And I think there's also a degree of sort of cultural um, baggage, can I say, with regards to this, that many of us might have read the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, it's absolutely great. And that sort of thinking about failure and success is perhaps comes naturally to those of us who are working more in the innovation space, but may not come naturally to your teams. And in many cultures, getting things wrong, could result in someone being fired. So creating that sense of psychological safety, especially where there's uncertainty about how exactly you're going to solve something, or indeed whether it's the right thing to solve, is often very important indeed. So next question from Matt. What's the best approach to alleviating concerns about the environmental impact of AI? Well, so I'll answer this from a technical perspective, and Wanda, be keen to understand your thoughts on this too. It's such a good question, and I think so many people don't realize just how carbon intensive electricity is, and obviously how important electricity is in building models and running them. So I think the first thing really is to ensure that however you're building things, there is some consideration for the cloud compute costs, which is a good proxy for the environmental impact, electricity required, the carbon dioxide being produced. So I think it's also critical to ensure that whoever is building the tool is cognizant of the amount of compute that's being used. So that's to say, it is really tempting to just throw resources at solving problems because it's relatively cheap, right? I mean, it could well be tens of thousands of pounds, but still relatively cheap. So there is a tendency sometimes, especially in pilots, prototypes, proof of concepts, etc., to just throw money at solving complex computational problems. And that sort of can make sense because sometimes you think, goodness, it's going to take a lot longer to build this in a more efficient way. But that trade-off is a very important one for people to consider because often there are ways of building models or rather deploying them that are more energy efficient, but often they require slightly more time to build them in that way. So often what we find is that throwing compute power at problems is often uh, sort of a replacement for building things properly in some cases. And there might be, certainly we do a lot of document processing at scale for various clients. There may well be ways of going about something that don't require a large language model. Large language models are very expensive, generally speaking, to run at scale and use a lot of electricity. I mean, it's the same, it's the same thing. But actually, asking the right questions, do you really need a large language model to do this particular piece of work? Could a more simple machine learning approach do this? Could something else, some optical character recognition, do the same thing? So again, I think that there's a tendency to sort of jump at large language models and say, hey, that's got to solve all of this. Whereas actually, in many cases, you want to decompose that process and only use the expensive and environmentally impactful models where they're strictly needed. So it could well be that focusing on cost reduction and running these systems will also support being more environmentally aware, because obviously the cloud costs associated with this is a direct kind of correlate with the environmental impact of deploying these tools. Wanda, how about you?
Yeah, Adam, I absolutely agree. I think the climate anxiety is quite real for a lot of people, and so finding ways of alleviating that through being clear about the usage of LLMs, both in your projects and your innovation work, but also just in your day-to-day usage with people. Being clear about what you do use, what you don't use, and why, and the thinking around that, providing them with that kind of clarity can be super, super helpful, as well as, this very iterative approach is a much kinder approach because we're not investing and going after something that is very long term with a lot of spend, where you reach a point where actually people don't want to come back from that, right? We are here, have this opportunity to try and to see what's going to add the most value for us, and then use it in that way.
Thank you very much. So next question, what are the biggest challenges in shifting from a purely technical AI focus to a truly human-centered one, and how can organizations overcome them? That's a great question. Well, I think that if I start answering this and Oh, sorry, I think I lost the connection there. I'll start answering that if that's okay. So I think that the it's an interesting framing of the question. I would say we've always got to focus on the outcome first, the commercial or organizational outcome, and the technical focus on AI is often where things can go wrong. A lot of what we do, well, hopefully has come through in this webinar, is not really focused on AI. AI is the easy bit. Generative AI is the easy bit. The hard bit is ensuring that you're understanding the right problem, that you're solving the right problem, or you're supporting the right problem, and you're going about solving that in a way that's compatible with the culture of your organization. Those are the things that really matter. The AI part of this is the easy bit. It's probably a peculiar thing to say for someone from an AI consultancy, but it is the easy bit because the technology is now so good. You only really need to imagine what you want, and it's possible. But you've got to make sure you're imagining the right thing, and that the context is appropriate. So in terms of the challenges, shifting from technical to a truly human-centered one, I think it really is about reframing the activity. What reframing it more towards what are those commercial outcomes that we're looking for? Which is perhaps a peculiar thing to say, but actually it's kind of focusing on the things that aren't AI. Those are the challenges because that often requires quite a mindset shift from everyone involved. And, also what I was saying earlier about agile methodologies, acceptance of the right type of failure, um, could well be quite unusual, especially if you have a large organization that has ways of working that have been very successful for it. It may well be that this approach um, could be quite disruptive, could feel quite alienating for people as well. And therefore, having perhaps a slightly separate team who are empowered to think like this and perhaps have some training in product management and more familiar with different project management styles as well. Those things can really help also. So there are a number of ways of going about this. I know Wanda at the beginning of the presentation mentioned sort of Skunk Works and so on. That's certainly one way of going about it. But I think the most important thing to realize here is this is all about the mindset and framing of how we're going about our work. The AI is the easy bit. Wanda, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think, Adam, for me, this speaks to very much to kind of a complex systems approach, right? Where you need to really, really be considering the human user at the end of the day on the other side. And so I think one of the big things here is to think about if we're mapping out the process and we're thinking about the roles and who's involved in those processes, is to think through really how will they be impacted, and address the problems very, very early. They're always going to be unknown unknowns, but considering upfront, for example, what might the unintended consequences of this thing be? And just asking the very simple questions like that can be hugely helpful in terms of unpacking some of that thinking really, really early on.
And that leads nicely into the next question. This is sort of related, which is for an organization just starting on their AI journey, what are the crucial first steps towards building a human-centered and adaptive AI strategy? And I think it's really interesting. Again, the phrase it's an anonymous question, so I'm not sure who's asked it. I think it's a really fascinating question because um, I'd say people have perhaps unwittingly been on an AI journey for a very long time. And the AI journey started from the moment you may have installed a CRM or ERP, or the moment you started recording data, or the moment you started mapping processes. Because I think AI in itself doesn't mean very much to me. AI is a technique, is a tool that can be used to further an improvement of a process. But I think the crucial first step I would always say is getting a pen and paper or whiteboard and trying to imagine what those processes are that make that business work and really boiling the business down to those basics. So if you're a retailer, you buy and sell things. It's very simple in principle. In practice, it's extremely complicated, of course. But actually stepping back and drawing out those processes and then thinking, well, which processes are worth if we could improve the efficiency of this particular decision-making process, what would it be worth to us? It may not be money, by the way. It could be increased effectiveness or efficiency. Um, and then gradually drilling down into those processes, and then trying to understand to what extent are people running those processes or machines, and where are the gaps between people and programs? Um, because often that's where there's opportunity, which is about linking things up better, and it's always about process and workflows. So I would say, perhaps slightly unconventionally, the first thing you should do when starting your AI journey is nothing to do with AI. It's all about understanding the processes in your business. Because what is a business or organization other than a collection of processes? And as Wanda was saying, often you have complex adaptive systems where you've got lots of unknowns, lots of processes that are ambiguous or information that's unclear. But ultimately, an organization is just a collection of processes being run by people and being run by machines. And therefore, if we're able to abstract the problem, we should be able to focus on what matters and then think about how to use AI properly. So final question then. Gen AI is a critical detracting factor of employee readiness and willingness of adoption, um, given the threat to various disciplines involved in that business. What's your view on overcoming these obstacles? Well, I'll have a go at answering this, but then I think I'll hand over to Wanda for the kind of final remarks. I would say I mean, we use internally, obviously, we use generative AI all the time. The biggest internal use case is in writing proposals, is writing concept notes. And it often surprises me just how much context you really need to give large language models to provide an output that is passable. But when you provide enough context, they can be extremely powerful. What I have personally found is that large language models, generative I feel are, in some senses, kind of expert machines. They're extremely good at supporting experts in whatever narrow field they have. They require a lot of context. What generative AI isn't particularly good at is supporting people who are below that expert level, unless it's like a really templated thing. Now, obviously, if you build an agentic system, that's kind of very different. Now, in terms of, let's say, game development, which I think is the context this question was asked in, I'd say it's almost inevitable, and I think we've got to be honest with people, that generative AI will be very good at certain things. It will be very good at certain things, um, and it probably won't be particularly good at others. So I think us just stepping back and thinking, gosh, what is generative AI quite good at, and how can that free up time to do other things? And equally, what things it really not very good at. Generative AI is not good at creativity. It's not good really at critiquing things. It doesn't have an imagination, and often provides, fairly predictable results. But what it can do, of course, is sort of take a template, take an idea, and then run with it and scale that up. So I would say generative AI in the medium term will be a great boon for humanity because it will force us to be more creative and more imaginative. And it will mean that the more kind of mundane, repetitive elements, even within creative industries, will be eliminated. In the short term, though, I completely agree with the premise of your question, which is there will be a lot of disruption. I personally would be very careful about designing that roadmap, but also be honest with people that, maybe certain things that people have been doing can just be done faster by machine. And I think that honesty is important, but then also focusing on the wealth of understanding that your employees are bringing and the value that they're bringing. So actually, I think that what this is really encouraging is quite a radical reimagining of what work means, um, which is possibly a bit scary, but it's not insurmountable with some really good communication. Wanda, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that your creatives, your game designers, your game developers are going to remain the SMEs. They're going to remain the artists. They're going to remain the creatives that they are. They're just going to be working with different tools. So instead of working with a particular technology tool, they'll be working with another particular technology tool. And I think for me, it's really leveraging what you were saying, Adam, around the context that's required and the context that is given really determines the outcome. And so therefore, you know, having those SMEs, having those creative minds, using the tool is going to produce a far better result because they know what to ask, they know how to construct the right prompts, they know what to tweak, they know the input and context that should be given. So I would say that actually they're likely to remain as creative, just using their creativity in a different way and using a different tool.
Thank you. Well, I think we've gone through all the questions now. It's been great to put on this webinar, and I hope everyone's found it useful. Please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can help you with. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everybody.